you to the September 9th workshop for our board meeting, and I call it to order with a roll call.
Mrs. Padasani. Here. Mrs. Hill. Here. Mrs. Davidson.
Here.
Mr. Forehand. Here. Mr. Bragman.
Here.
Thank you. I'd like to move for adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Motion carries 5-0. And now we move into our workshop, and we're going to have a presentation by Mrs. Reed on the beginning of the year standardized assessments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Davison. Really is my pleasure tonight to present for the board. And this presentation really is part one of a two-part series. So it's really a series on how we use data as an instructional tool. Tonight, I'll be overviewing our beginning of the year standardized assessments and screeners. And then probably September, October-ish, once our collaboration days end, we'll come back and we'll talk about using data to inform instructional practices. So really the goal or 4 objectives over this two-part series are to understand the purpose of our assessments, learn about the key beginning of the year assessments because many of these are new to us this year with the mandate of SB 114, see how data informs instruction, and explore how our collaboration days with teachers went and how we're analyzing data to really make sure that we're effectively using collaborative practices across all of our school sites. And then lastly, connecting that analysis to student outcomes, which is the ultimate goal for us, that we put this hard work in with teachers and they do a lot of hard work day in and day out in the classrooms, that using this data and spending the time with it will actually impact student outcomes for us. So that will be hopefully over this two-part series, the information I'll be able to share with the board. So tonight really is part one, looking at our beginning of the year standardized assessments and diagnostic screeners. And so I do want to spend a moment just picking apart the difference between standardized assessments and local assessments, because I think sometimes they can get confused. And so standardized assessments or screeners are ones that we're collecting data on district-wide, and they're the same classroom to classroom, school site to school site. We administer them consistently across schools and grade levels. We provide comparable data to guide both teacher decisions as well as help inform district decisions. These assessments are widely used beyond our district, so they're a standard best practice in many school districts, and they help inform our resource allocation, our program evaluation, and progress monitoring of students. We also have local assessments. Those are assessments that teachers use in their classroom with their teams where they're collecting just classroom data. It could be, for example, like a Chapter 10 test in the classroom or a beginning of the year math fluency assessment that teachers are going to give. It's still helping guide instruction, but they're not inputting it into a central bank of information where we're looking at the same assessment across the district. They're really using that more at the classroom level. And so other than tests would also be writing prompts in the beginning of the year. Sometimes you'll see performance tasks that teachers will give to really get a big picture of where kids are coming from and where they can go this school year. They provide immediate feedback for daily instruction and grading, and the data really stays at the classroom level and isn't centralized or aggregated the way we would with the data from our standardized assessments or screeners. And so this process really starts in the first 2 weeks of school with our kindergarten welcome conferences. For those of you that have had kinders come through the school district, we have this amazing opportunity for our families to sit down with their kindergarten classroom teacher for 30 minutes and really explore where their incoming kinder is, both social emotionally as well as academically. Also allows the classroom teacher to get to know each of their kinders and their families. And so during that process, we start with our quick phonics survey, one of our standardized assessments, to really gain knowledge even at the letter sound level of where our students are when they're in our kindergarten classrooms. And then that same type of work comes all the way through 10th grade. So tonight we'll be exploring what that looks like in the beginning of the school year from kindergarten through 10th grade.
Can I ask just
Of
one
course.
clarification? Did you say, so the kindergarten conference, the half hour, the student is there with the parents?
That's accurate, Mrs. Davidson.
I want to make sure. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. So I'm kind of going to go chronologically, so starting from kindergarten and then making our way up through 10th grade. This year, a new assessment for us is M-Class, and it comes from Amplify. It's a diagnostic universal screener, and it's actually the one that we've identified through SB 114 that we'll be using as our dyslexia screener in January for our kindergarten students. It's focused really really is on early literacy skills. It looks at phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, comprehension, and vocabulary. And its purpose really is to identify students at risk of reading difficulties, and it monitors progress over time. So we give it 3 times a school year, the beginning of the year, so we're currently in our M-class window now, the middle of the year in January, which is the window that we've identified with the county and the state of California that we'll be using as our SB 114 dyslexia screener. So when we're using the screener in the beginning of the school year, it's really to inform our practice. We're looking at our reading lab groupings, how teachers can provide that targeted tier support. But in the middle of the school year, we'll also be informing parents of how their child did on this assessment, as well as provide them information as to whether or not this screener is indicating that the child may be at risk of a reading difficulty. And if so, explaining to families how we'll be supporting their student in the classroom and maybe outside the classroom through tier 2 supports and structured literacy. And so it is administered one-on-one. The reason why we chose this instead of going with Amira, which I'll talk about next for first and second graders, is that it allows a kindergarten teacher to sit with a student one-on-one and hear them live read to them and build that connection. We didn't really want to rely on AI with a 4 or 5-year-old. And so this test is more time consuming than the Amira benchmark that we'll talk about next. But teachers do sit with a student. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes to administer individually. And so we're currently doing that during the early release time for kindergarten teachers. So for the next 3 weeks, kindergarten teachers traditionally owe us back a certain number of instructional minutes because their day ends earlier than our 1st through 5th grade teachers, and they provide intervention groups. They won't be doing that over the next 3 weeks because 4 to 5 students will be staying back with them each school day from the kindergarten release time to the regular dismissal time, so that they're able to administer the M class in a quiet environment with only 4 or 5 students present. And so it will take us about 3 weeks to get our beginning of the year data. That data from M class really will guide classroom instruction. It identifies intervention needs. It helps us monitor growth as we repeat that from kindergarten on, and it fulfills our state dyslexia mandate when we give it in January. So M-Class doesn't just give a single score. It really does provide actionable, skill-specific data that teachers can immediately use to group students, plan instruction, and track progress.
A quick question. In the event that a student is identified as having dyslexia, can you help explain sort of what happens next?
Well, we don't actually diagnose nor identify students as having dyslexia. What these screeners do is inform us as to whether or not students are displaying behaviors consistent with someone who struggles to grasp comprehension or early reading standards, and that could be someone who has dyslexia, but we don't diagnose dyslexia. And so should a student in our January screener show that they're showing signs that they're going to be struggling with reading comprehension, then we would make sure that we're addressing those needs, and they could be anything from something that could be almost normally developmental, where students are struggling with blends, or it could be middle of the year that it's not normally developmental. We have a kindergarten student who's still really struggling to identify the letters in their name or the phonemes that come with each of those sounds. And so we would look, as a student already been in small group instruction inside the classroom, and if so, at what level? And if that hasn't been successful, then are they in our tier 2 intervention? So at kindergarten, that could be in the reading lab. And so each of those steps through the MTSS model, students would spend a significant amount of time in before we would determine moving on through the school years with that support that they weren't meeting actionable goals for a student who's showing early signs.
Okay, thanks.
And is this communicated to parents along the way?
In January, it's communicated to families as required. So for both Amira and our M-Class screeners that are meeting that dyslexia mandate, we did share with all families in the first week of school before back to school night what our screener was and when our screening time would be, and also that they have the option as a parent or guardian to opt out of having their child assessed. So that is a parent's right under SB 114. Because our window is the January window, we will re-notify families 2 weeks before the assessment window of when the assessment will be given. Parents will also have another opportunity to opt out if they choose. Then the law says we have 45 days to share with families how their child did on that assessment, and then if they were showing some signs, as Mrs. Partisani asked, then what our plan is, so that parents are really in the loop on that process. So much like in kindergarten where we're giving M-class, we're using the Amira screener, the benchmark screener, in grades 1 and 2 to meet the SB 114 dyslexia mandate. It also is a diagnostic measure and a screener. However, it's very different. It's geared and focused through a modality of artificial intelligence, and it's an adaptive oral fluency screener because it's responding in real time to a student's cadence, to their rhythm, to the errors that they're making in terms of their reading. And so it looks at reading fluency, accuracy, comprehension, as well as miscue analysis. Why is a student missing a particular sound or a word? It is also given 3 times a year. And so sometimes it's confusing when you're in classrooms and you see students run a mirror regularly. That's a mirror practice where students at their own level are building skills in fluency, and it's pinpointing breakdowns where they specifically are. 3 times a year, it takes about 10 or 15 minutes. They come off of a mirror practice and go into the Amira benchmark. That benchmark is informed by the Amira practice that they're doing. So it gives us a very accurate picture of how a student's reading. Teachers are also able to access all of those reading snippets that are recorded in Amira and listen for should Amira signal to them that a student's showing challenges or that they're off of where Amira predicted them to be at this time of the year, so that then they're able to pinpoint strategically from the classroom teacher level if changes need to be made in terms of reading instruction or potentially tier 2 interventions as well. And so much like the M class, we also notified all 1st and 2nd grade families that Amira would be our benchmark for 1st and 2nd grade, and outlined that same system and dates for them as well. And so they also will be receiving a reminder letter in December that in January our benchmark window for Amira will open up that will serve as the dyslexia screener for us.
You said 1st and 2nd grade? Mm-hmm. And then on top here, it says 1st through 5th. So do upper grades also use Amira?
They do use Amira, but we're not mandated by SB 114 to report to those families. And so SB 114 is a K2 mandate. And so it won't be that we won't share information. It just won't be in the same fashion that we're mandated to do so through the protocols that were written into SB 114. So this data really is used for teachers to look at reports on fluency, accuracy, error patterns, and then Amira also gives suggested instructional next steps as it's connected to our ELA adoption, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt into reading at the elementary level. So it's one of the benefits of using it inside our 1st and 2nd grade classroom is that it connects to our basal readers and our program and gives teachers opportunities and points them in directions of next steps and where to go with kiddos as well.
Lead to conversations between the teacher and the support staff, the intervention teachers that we have at all the elementary schools. How does that all work? Where they might diagnose something on Amira and then convey it to them that it needs to work on?
It's a great question. And on the next one, the quick phonics survey, it's really a triangulation of these multiple measures that we look at when we make recommendations for a student to leave tier 1 instruction inside the classroom and receive that tier 2 instruction inside of our reading lab. And so classroom teachers will be using the data from their 2 metrics, whether it's M-class and quick phonics survey or the MIRA and the quick phonics survey, to identify those students through a forced ranking. So my highest performing student to my lowest performing student, and which bands and percentiles of students would need to be seen inside the reading lab. Perfect. So Amira, different than M-class, and then it provides an AI-powered oral reading screener that not only measures how accurately and fluently students read, but also pinpoints the type of errors they make. This allows teachers to quickly identify whether a student's struggles are decoding, fluency, or comprehension, and tailor their instruction accordingly. And that breakdown between decoding, fluency, and comprehension is the exact information we need when building our reading lab groups, because our groups are very specific to the breakdown and where our student is struggling to make adequate progress as a reader. Is it a decoding issue? Is it a fluency issue? Or is it a comprehension issue? And traditionally, our lab groups are really focused on decoding and fluency, and the comprehension work happens inside the classroom. And so the quick phonics survey is that additional piece of information that we use when breaking down where reading may be falling apart or where reading is accelerating for some students. And so the quick phonics survey is a diagnostic survey. It's delivered one-on-one, where a teacher really models for a student a series of words, and then students read words aloud from a structured list as teachers then note take miscues or errors that students are making when it comes to decoding, sounding out at the word level and passage level. And so it pinpoints gaps in phonics knowledge and guides explicit intervention. It's given 3 times a year. However, students can exit out of the quick phonics survey. So that little asterisk there is that students no longer take it once they've exit out of the assessment and they display mastery, because it's really looking at our phonics building at the lowest level. And so we will have students that exit out and show mastery in all of the decoding areas. And so we don't continue to give that assessment once a student has shown proficiency on the quick phonics survey. And so it helps teachers really in the kindergarten and first grade space, and then for some struggling second graders, determine what specific phonics skills to target during our intervention, as well as small group instruction inside the classroom.
So it's a little bit unrelated, but related. So when we get new teachers, what happens? I mean, there are gaps in people's learning. I was not taught phonics. Do our teachers go through a special training for phonics? And when you have a new teacher come in, because there were periods of time where phonics was not what you want to do. And I totally love what I see in the classrooms, but I wouldn't want to be responsible for it.
So I think it's really 2-tier. Any teacher that we hire, whether they're from student teaching or from another school district who's entered with us, engages in a 5-year professional development plan, where we're very fortunate. Evan Grandin, our literacy TOSA, is just a 10, amazing. Her knowledge base, her willingness to meet our staff where they are at and really problem solve for every child is hands down second to none. And she provides coaching in the classroom as well as structured full day instruction. And then our veteran teachers who have come, I'd say, from different swings of the pendulum in education, have had to come back and join some of our newer teacher trainings to get a different lens as a veteran on where structured literacy is now. And so as you can imagine, if you've been teaching 25 years, you've probably gone from whole language to a reader's workshop model and now back to a phonics-based model that was around during the 80s. So we really try to adjust and meet staff where they are. Mm-hmm.
I had a quick question. And I don't expect you to know this answer, but I'm just kind of curious. When you say that most of our students, once they have mastered this level, can you give me a general idea of when you think mastery would be typical in our district?
I think we hope that all students master that by beginning of the year, second grade, for the quick phonics survey.
Yeah.
But obviously you'll have students on a wide continuum. I'd say it's very rare in the beginning or middle of the year in kindergarten, but for some of our students who naturally engage as a fluent reader by the end of kindergarten, and then a normal matriculation through first grade as reading really becomes the forefront of instruction. And then really, I'd say developmentally appropriate before we really have concerns would even be beginning of the year, second grade, because you're talking about multisyllabic words at this point. You're talking about some chunking that are not normal and have errors that some students just take longer. It doesn't mean they're not reading at grade level. It just means they're still part of that decoding code that they're breaking.
Great. Thank you so much.
So the QPS really pinpoints specific phonic gaps by checking decoding and word recognition skills, and it allows teachers to design targeted small group or individual interventions sometimes for where students have just a small gap that still needs to be filled. So Easy CBM is new to us this school year as well, and it comes from the University of Oregon. It's replacing quite a lengthy assessment that we gave for quite some time, referred to as Fountas and Pinnell. And so there's a lot of excitement about the potential of this assessment because it's twofold. One, where you individually assess and still hear a student orally read, but then the student goes back to their desk and takes an online comprehension component that merges with the oral reading fluency that the teacher recorded to really give us a complete profile of a proficient reader. And so it's both a benchmark and a progress monitoring assessment, meaning if I give it in the beginning of the year and my student is at benchmark, I'm probably not going to give it again to middle of the year. But if my student is below the 26th percentile, I can then use the progress monitoring assessments, there's 16 inside, to then check in with that student more regularly as we approach the middle of the year and end of the year assessment for Easy CBM. So Easy CBM really has two focus, because now we're in 2nd through 5th grade. So you'll notice 2nd grade is really hit the hardest when it comes to these reading assessments. And so I want to give a big shout out to all 2nd grade teachers for really having to dig in deep with both the phonics, decoding, and fluency, and start to touch into this comprehension work. Because once our students leave 2nd grade, we know that it's paramount that as many students as possible are reading at grade level as we start to move from learning to read to reading to learn in 3rd grade. And so this assessment really looks twofold, both at the oral reading fluency, really measuring how quickly and accurately a student can read grade level text aloud. When we think about being a fluent reader and someone sounding like they understand the roadmap of punctuation as they're reading, right, that's a fluent reader. And then also the reading comprehension component, measuring understanding of written text through multiple choice questions. And so the purpose of this is really to determine where students are at now. They're in 2nd grade and they're moving forward. Are you at grade level, below grade level, or above grade level when we look at you as a complete reader, both your fluency and your ability to comprehend text? And so that's why there is 2 parts. The teacher sits down. It's a 1-minute fluency test where a student begins to read out loud the grade level passage in front of them, and the teacher has the text on their screen, and they're marking miscues, and a timer is going simultaneously. And so when they're done with that component, the teacher marks where the student ends on the passage, completes the timer, and then the system gives us their fluency or their rate to let us know where they fall in terms of their fluency, matched with the miscues that the teacher has marked through the assessment. The student then goes online and takes a reading passage comprehension assessment, anywhere from 10 to 20 questions, and the system that University of Oregon has built then merges that information together to give us a clearer picture of a profile of a reader 2nd grade and on. And so this data is really used to identify students that, even though they're progressing past 2nd grade and on, may still need fluency or comprehension support. Group students for instruction, when we see that small group instruction taking place in our classroom, monitor reading growth, because even if you're a student who's reading above grade level, we have a commitment that we want to see all students grow, right, a full reading level in the classroom, as well as inform our intervention decisions, right, be another way for us to know if what we're doing is working, whether it's a tier 1 inside the classroom or tier 2 inside of perhaps the reading lab for a 2nd grader, or an after-school intervention for a 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade student. And so Easy CBM, much like M-Class and Amira, provides the oral reading fluency, but now we're adding in that comprehension data to the big picture, really helping teachers determine whether students are at, above, below grade level, and track that growth over time. Because as students progress from 2nd grade on, we'll have multiple measures to make sure we're comparing similar metrics to each other for each student.
Ms. Reed?
Yes.
Quick question. First of all, I'm sure teachers appreciate Faunus Pinnell takes forever. So I'm sure they're relieved. But I do know with Faunus Pinnell, the teachers were getting the Lexile levels and getting the appropriate reading levels right for students. So does the Easy CBM still do that? And then are we communicating to students and parents what books they should be reading independently, what levels they should
So
be?
Fountas and Pinnell actually didn't give us a Lexile level. What it produced for us was an alphanumeric letter.
right, yeah.
That's okay. That shows where students are from that pre-primer to A all the way to Z, which would be about a 10th grade student and beyond. A Lexile is a very comparative metric when we talk about reading. And so Easy CBM does give us a Lexile. However, we're recommending that teachers rely on the MAP Lexile level given when it comes to 2nd through 5th grade, as there's many more measures that are going into and more questions that take a student all the way up to their breaking point, as I'll talk about on the next slide, when we look at assessing a student adaptively.
Awesome. Thank you.
So,
Sorry, Mrs. Reed.
yes.
One more question. I love the fact that you said the results of the Easy CBM gives you information around where the student lies at the 3 different levels. So either they're at, below, or above. And it's used primarily, it sounds like, for intervention purposes. So you know which students are not performing where they should be and what intervention they need to go to. Could you help explain what happens when students are on the bubble or above? And what type of support do we give for those students?
So Easy CBM actually isn't just for students for intervention. Easy CBM is our first reading metric that gives us information within the grade level and beyond the grade level. And so this is great information for a teacher in terms of A, picking those novel choices for a whole class, as well as picking novel choices or small group reads for the way that they cluster their readers inside of a classroom. So if you think about a typical 5th grade classroom, I probably have 34 students, and I probably have 6 reading levels inside a balanced classroom. And so this information allows me to serve like-minded peers and strategically support where they are at as a reader versus me doing a whole class lesson where I'm targeting my grade level standards and providing scaffolding for those students who can't reach the grade level standards I'm teaching. So Easy CBM actually hits on all of those metrics inside a classroom.
Great.
So we get a little more robust in terms of data as we cross over into what would be a more adaptive benchmark assessment. So we've been looking primarily at diagnostic reading assessments, and now we're kind of crossing over 2nd through 10th grade and looking more holistically at what do students know, what are their readiness skills, and what are their growth over time. And so NWA MAP is a nationally normed, it's an assessment actually given around the world globally. And it looks at both reading comprehension, vocabulary, language usage, as well as the mathematics domain that lie within each of the grade levels, 2nd through 10th grade. And so it's different in what we were looking at in terms of screeners because it actually takes a student to their fallout. So the MAP growth assessment is designed to take students to a point where they're getting 50% of the questions right and 50% of the questions wrong. So we can actually look at growth and percentile growth over time for each individual student. And so we do give this test 3 times a year, beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year. It is computer adaptive, and it can take anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours because a student's stamina, their test anxiety, the testing environment, their willingness, their engagement, right, are all going to play a part in their learning profile when you're talking about taking an adaptive test that eventually, as you get things right, the questions get harder. And as you get things wrong, the questions get easier. And so this is our 2nd year administering this assessment, 2nd through 8th grade. So those students have a bigger schema and foundation and understanding about what an adaptive assessment would look like and why we take this test. But I'm really excited because the high schools team has done some great work, and we're bringing on 9th and 10th grade teams, both in math and ELA, which I'll talk about on the next slide as well. And so really, when we look at MAP, we get multiple measures that are helpful to us in many ways. The first is it provides a RIT score, which I'll go into a little more depth on the next slide. But it's a stable scale score that shows current performance and growth. The next is we get a growth percentile. And I think that's really, I'll put my parent hat on. For me as a parent, that's probably the most important part that I would be interested in because it looks at students not only as low achieving and high achieving, but as low growth and high growth. And we know that the research shows that our high achieving students that have low growth are actually the students who find the most struggle in rigorous courses in high school and beyond in college. And so that's a lot of our kids that are high achievers but low growth. And so we know that low achievers, high growth can over time outperform our high achievers, low growth, if we're not cued into their engagement and providing relevant curriculum to them as well. And so that growth percentile compares a student's growth to the growth of academically similar peers nationwide. And that information is normed every 4 years. So we're actually entering into a brand new norming year. And so in terms of looking at grade level equivalencies, we'll be working on those tomorrow. Our MAP window just shut down on Monday. So today was the day that we pulled all of our raw data, and we'll be resetting with the new norms what grade level equivalencies within our school district as well as national norms are. So it gives you a really great sense as a parent. Here's how my child is performing within Los Alamitos Unified, but here's also how my child is performing nationally. And so I think it's a really important measure to talk about, which is a little different because you're looking at always measuring a student's own growth potential against themselves, as well as what that looks like comparatively to peers.
Ms. Reed, with that data, is that going to be uploaded into Aries so parents can see it, or how will it be shared?
I'll talk about that in the next slide, but that's a great question. So we purposely didn't share it this last year because honestly, this was like a foreign language for us. Right? We really took a leap of faith and made a drastic change in our benchmarks last school year. And I'll say this, our teachers took a really big leap of trust with us. So kudos to all of them. And so I would never want a teacher to sit down at a parent conference and talk about a Roush unit that they weren't prepared to speak about, or talk about low achieving, high growth without understanding the 4 domains. And so we did spend last year with a lot of great days partnering with MAP to give teachers that language. And so we'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. Mrs. Hill.
I just wanted to step back on something because you said something and it just kind of triggered something in my head, and I just want to make sure I understood. So how do we manage if 30 students can take these MAP assessments, and some can be in them for, and I'm making up numbers, a half an hour, and some can be in for 2.5 hours.
It is
How is that managed?
It's really one of the challenges. And so we know that it takes the longest with a new student because the system is informed on prior information. So if you're a second grader or a student new to our district taking MAP for the first time, the test takes longer because it has to find your fallout. Versus I'm a third grader and I've taken MAP 3 times. MAP understands where I was when I left off, and so they're pinpointing the place that they start, and the length of the test takes less time because you're already at a predictable, measurable start point. So teachers have to be managed with must-do and may-do menus, knowing that some of their class may be done earlier. Maybe they're partnering with the teacher next door to check in at a 60-minute mark, and if one teacher can go outside with the kids that are done, or the kids who aren't done moves over to one teacher's classroom, and then one teacher can start a lesson. But it is part of, I'd say, the crunch of assessment, and really why it's so important for us to talk about assessment as an instructional tool. Because I do think it's worth the loss of some instructional time for students for us to have accurate diagnostic information on where students are actually at a few times a year. It'll be harder in a secondary classroom, which will the high school is going to be harder because they have shorter periods of time to assess. They'll have to do it over multiple days. Something our middle schools implemented last year and they're continuing this year is we developed a benchmark assessment schedule at the middle school where students come for a 2-hour and 15-minute block to their first period class, or a designated class that the middle school has said is going to be where you take the test, and they're able to get pretty much 95% of students completed and then do makeups. And so they do that for 2 days, 3 times a year. The first day, give ELA tests, for example. On the second day, give the math assessment. So we're trying to minimize the impact that you're referring to.
Thank you very much.
Can I just say, and even on the PTA meeting for McAuliffe today, I know Mr. Quartermarsh even spoke to like how teachers really persevered through that for the first time. So it is worth shouting out that I know that he addressed it with the parents, just the fact that teachers had to do that, and switching the schedule on 6th graders when they just got used to their schedule for a couple of days. But he talked about the fact that 6th graders were really very good about changing the schedule. And also I appreciate how deliberate they were, again, just as a 6th grade picture, but changing the schedule so every student had their fourth period, so they continued to have a lunch schedule where it was at the right time, and sixth graders stayed by themselves still. So there was a lot of thought put into it, and I appreciate that. I know that was supported by the staff here, but also just to hear him say after week one of doing it the first time around, it went great.
And I'd add wholeheartedly to what you just said, because Liam, and this is sixth grader, he knew better the schedule that he was going to follow than his brother in eighth grade. So they took lots of time to help these sixth graders, and it all made perfect sense.
So a metric that MAP provides us that we haven't previously had is it predicts CAS performance as well. And so it can predict whether students will meet or exceed standards or are not yet on track. And so last year was the first year that we began looking at how to use this information instructionally in our classrooms, which I'll also talk about in an upcoming slide. Something that we haven't been sharing out, and I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure where the best platform would be or what grade level it is, but beginning in grade 5, MAP also predicts college readiness by predicting your SAT or ACT score and giving early indicators of future preparedness. And so we're grappling with that one, and I'm sure there's going to be a great space to share that, but I would never want that to be more than an estimate, because students in 5th grade have a long way to go, and I wouldn't want a lot of credence put in that. I know our community cares deeply about college and career readiness, and so I would want to make sure that we're sharing that at the right time with the right language. I don't think we're quite there yet. So MAP really helps inform grouping in the classroom, differentiation, intervention planning at the class, school, and even at the district level, because one of the benefits of a centralized data point is that we can look at this holistically as a class of 2031, the class of 2032, and then maybe also when we look at our student outcomes, talk about those instructional strategies at different school sites that might be impacting students with a greater effect size. And so MAP data gives us both absolute scores like a RIT score, as well as relative growth measures like percentiles, showing not only how much students grew, but whether that growth is keeping pace with peers across the nation. And so I want to talk a little bit about how the math testing is different across the grade levels when we look at MAP, because I know I've shared with the board previously, one of the challenges in preparing high school students for taking a CASP assessment is that we have students in 16 different classes of mathematics. And so it's hard to give both a benchmark that gives us information about where students are at in their content. So I'm in Algebra 2, for example. And then what does that mean when I'm going to take a summative assessment like CASP that's looking at learning from pre-algebra through Algebra 2. And so when we look at MAP and the two different variances, grades 2 through 8, it is a broad math test. So it covers multiple domains, operations, algebraic thinking. It provides us a general math RIT score. It tracks growth year to year. It predicts CASP. And it's really best for overall strengths and needs when looking at grouping and instruction. When we move to the high school in grades 9 and 10, students could be enrolled in Intro to Algebra, Algebra, Honors Geometry, Principles of Geometry, Geometry, Intermediate Algebra, and Algebra 2, all if you're a 9th or a 10th grader. And so students will be taking a math assessment that's course aligned. And so we have a Math 6, which is your pre-algebra, Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2, MAP math score test that students will be taking. It will not be a broad spectrum math assessment like is given in grades 2 through 8. And so it provides subject-specific RIT scores tied to high school standards, which is very different than the broadband mathematical domain standards that we see in grades K through 8. It tracks readiness for advanced coursework like pre-calc and AP calc. That's a metric we haven't previously had. So a lot of curiosity around that. And it predicts CAS performance still in the high school math area. So they correlate that data. And so we'll see this year how accurate that correlation is. And this is really best for deep insight into specific content areas as well as preparedness of students. So the 2 through 8 math gives a broad picture of overall math development, while the 9 through 10 subject-specific math provides a deeper course-aligned view that connects directly to high school coursework and then college readiness.
So, Mrs. Reed, is this new for us, for our district?
It absolutely is new in 9th and 10th grade.
Yes, and is this something we did last year also, or
No,
no,
it's
just
not.
this year?
Last year, we did 2 through 8 and really focused on wanting to make sure we understand how to effectively administer this, how to look at the data, the amount of time it would take before we impacted the schedule at the high school, and learned a little bit more about how this information could be still useful for a teacher who's teaching Algebra 2, but also has a student taking CAST, for example. In ELA, it's the same 2 through 10. It's a broad picture of those English language arts standards that look at comprehension, language, and vocabulary acquisition.
Is this replacing anything, or is this just completely new?
It's
set of
replacing
assessments?
some local benchmarks that teams had developed in their course-specific teams.
Okay,
You got it.
thanks.
So we've been talking a lot about this RIT score, and I think it is important to understand what that Roush unit is. And so it's a stable score that MAP growth uses, and I like to think of it like a student's location on a learning ladder. It's kind of like earlier when Mr. Bragman said, you know, we were looking at phonics and Pinnell, and we have this A to Z ladder that students traverse. The RIT score is similar. Students start at a low score, and as they get older, we hopefully see their RIT score increasing with their learning. The scale is continuous, so it's not tied to a grade level. And the RIT score of 210 means the same thing in 3rd grade as 7th grade, because you're really looking at where a student is on their learning journey. So that RIT score does not change per grade level. As we share this information with parents, they will have a continuous measure of how their student is growing on that learning ladder. And so it shows a level of skills that a student has mastered. It's something that we can actually track over time because it's a consistent, stable measure, different than a percentile ranking, which I've already shared I love because it's showing you how your student's doing compared to other peers and how they're growing. This is a stable measure. And so new this year, as Mrs. Partisani just mentioned, is our assessing in grades 9 through 10. And then new this year, coming back to Mr. Bragman's question earlier, is we will be providing MAP testing information to parents at the elementary parent conferences. So there is no way currently to get the data into Aries. But we do have a way to print a great parent report that will come to our elementary parents with a letter from my office that explains what they're looking at and what they're seeing. And then we're working right now to determine the best way, and we've contacted a couple other districts who use this, the best way to communicate this information to our families in grades 6 through 10. And so earlier this year, the board approved a contract with a company called Panorama, and they are, I would say they're like a data mining resource because they can take in information from all of our different points and synthesize it. So we're exploring if through Panorama maybe is the best way. But we are prepared at the elementary level, and we spent the time talking about how this will be shared at parent-teacher conferences at the elementary level.
I want to make sure I understand what you mean by growth. How would you define growth?
So if you think about a bell curve, right, a 50% percentile means you're making average growth to peers. If you're at the 25 percentile, obviously 75% of your peers are outperforming you. So you'll get a RIT score. I'm going to make this up. You have a RIT score of 220, but you have a percentile growth of 25%. So you are low performing compared to other peers who are at the 220. If that makes sense.
Yes.
Perfect. And so although we haven't yet put our RIT scores into grade level equivalency bands because we're in a new norming year, that is the work that we'll be doing between now and Thursday when we have our first data day that we'll talk about, because we'll take our bands of RIT from students that have taken the assessment and look at what our standardized grade level equivalency, I'm going to make this up, 200 to 217 is 2nd grade. That's where the majority of our students are falling. 212 to 225 is 3rd grade, so that parents can get a sense within our school district where their RIT score falls with a grade level equivalency. That will be the stable score. The one that will change every time the student takes the test is that percentile ranking.
So that's what, Mrs. Reed, that's what you mean when you say low achieving, high growth, high achieving, low growth. It can be measured that way.
You got it. Because what if you had a third grader who was at the top of our grade level equivalency with their RIT score, say a 220, but their percentile ranking is at the 25th percentile, right? So they are high achieving now, but low growth compared to you won't get a percentile ranking to a student who has taken this test. So last year when we first started, in the beginning of the year, we only had RIT scores. By the middle of the year, we had a percentile ranking because now over time, I'm able to compare a student's growth. So for many of our students, their percentile ranking is becoming more defined because we're getting more data points in the system. For anyone enrolled with us last year in 2nd through 8th grade, they already have 3 data points in the system. So now as we expand this to 10th grade, think about it, 2nd through 10th grade, you have taken this test 3 times a year. So it's getting a lot of information about the way you learn and about the skills that you have.
And one final question on this. Given that it's new, do we know how long this takes? So because you're conducting it 3 times a year, how many minutes are we, essentially taking away?
It can be 45 minutes and it could be 2 hours. And at some point we call it for a student, right? So that's the site decision. If a student's been in, I'm going to make this up right now, for 2.5 hours and we pulled them out, at some point we'll just pause their assessment. And it'll indicate that on the assessment as well.
2 things. To that question, I'm not sure if we would necessarily say we're taking it away because we had district benchmarks prior, at least grades 2 through 8 or 3 through 8.
We had 2 through, and then some through 10th. There was an algebra. We had an English 1 and English 2.
Which were somewhat similar. They were different. We created them. We had worked with other consultants, but that would have taken up class time as well. And they were given 2 or 3 times a year, I believe, as well.
They were given 2 or 3 times a year.
So these benchmarks are replacing those, but we think give us much richer data. Second, can you unpack a little bit more about percentile? Because I think when we were talking, particularly like what does a 50 percentile look like? For some families, they might think, oh, that's a poor score. And can you illuminate a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that was a lot of the deep dive what we shared with our teachers is because we're used to thinking about the 50th as a fail, right? The 50th is the mean, right? It's right in the middle. You're average. You're right where you should be. And so part of our hesitation in sharing out some of this information with families early on was without the right education and information to support it, if a family was to see the 50th percentile, they may really come into a panic when really their student is right in the middle of the bell curve, right where they should be. And sometimes I think it's also reaffirming for families who have a student who struggles if they see that although their RIT score is lower, but their percentile ranking is growing every time, that their student is in fact now starting to outperform peers at the rate by which they learn, even though their RIT score might be lower on the band. So I think it gives us a lot more information about where our students are at and how to help them. And I think coming back to what Dr. Pulver said, although it takes up time in the classroom, I could say you're wasting a lot of time as a teacher if you don't know where to target your instruction. And so I think this is a larger safety net to say, I know what I'm teaching, not just because it's a gut feeling, but because I have information on all of my students that supports the instructional decisions I'm making in my classroom, if that makes sense. So,
And then, sorry, only because we were at LAE today doing a walkthrough, Mrs. Davidson and I, and at least at our elementary level with our ELA adoption, this is integrated into MAP. So even will give the teacher even more information directly into our textbook adoption that we have approved. And as we saw a little bit later, we saw our students working in Waggle, both in ELA and in math, which was very intriguing for us. But that's what's nice about these benchmarks too, in terms of the instruction. It will continue to help guide the instruction because it's also feeding directly into the actual textbooks that our teachers are using at the elementary level.
So HMH owns NWEA, and so their interface is built so that a student's MAP score informs the learning continuum inside of HMH. So a teacher can actually look at the learning continuum when it comes to specific standards and skills, and students are already grouped instructionally where they're ready for learning. So teachers know exactly how to target different areas. HMH offers both Waggle as well as Read 180 and Math 180 through a program called Personalized Path, and our MAP assessment informs both of those platforms on where a student should start. So there's no wasted time and the system having to learn at where the correct entry point to either enrich and extend if you're in a Waggle system, or provide remediation if you're in a Math 180 or Read 180 system inside of our classrooms. So it really is, I'd say it's a big full picture profile at our elementary classrooms about how this information is used to make sure students are entering and accessing curriculum at the right level.
So to that point, I know that at middle school and high school, teachers have a conference period. They have a period to be able to take the time to be able to check this data. And how do we help elementary school teachers be able to have that same ability to do that, and then to lesson plan to that?
Absolutely. So on the next slide, I'm actually going to talk about how we're facilitating data analysis, but I also want to remind the board that elementaries have early release every Wednesday. And so there is planning release times, 250 minutes that elementary teachers have, because they also have release in their schedule for their specials, whether that's students going to music or to their makerspace, to the media center that they have to look at that space as well. So I'm not going to say it's an equivalent to a conference period, but I'm going to say the same space exists. So just to kind of wrap up our assessments purposes at a glance, we really looked at two different types of assessments today. We looked at early literacy screeners, which were M-Class Amira, our QPS, and our Easy CBM. And we also looked at a broad growth and estate alignment assessment with MAP. And so our early literacy screeners are really to be more diagnostic and inform where we're going. They don't predict CASP, whereas our broad growth MAP assessments really provide grade level and national comparisons, and then also include that CASP prediction. So screeners and diagnostics for immediate instructional planning, ours are literacy focused currently, and MAP growth is for monitoring long-term progress, focusing instruction on standards and skills students are ready to learn, and then predicting performance on state accountability tests like CASP, as well as SAT and ACT. So what now? I think that's a great question Mrs. Hill had. We have all this information and we have taken instructional time. So what will we do with this information? And so we are investing time in structures that allow teachers to move beyond testing and really take this instructional information to actionable instructional planning that directly benefits students. And so we're hosting district-wide grade level collaboration days. This is nothing new to the LoSal Way. These days existed for many, many years prior to the pandemic. And then, as many of you know, schools look different post-pandemic, and substitute coverage looked very different post-pandemic. And so we really are excited to bring this back. Our teachers will be coming together by grade level district-wide to analyze their MAP growth data. They'll be identifying class, group, and individual student needs, developing instructional plans based off of this data, sharing strategies and aligning practices across schools, and then really focusing on using assessment results to inform instruction and improve outcomes. And so beginning this Thursday, grade 5 will be joining us, and then we'll see grade 3, grade 4, middle school English, middle school math, as well as both math and ELA at the high school joining us between now and September 25th. And so we have this same model planned for the middle of the year assessment. So we'll go back into these data and reflection days after we give our middle of the year assessment as well. So I'd love to answer any additional questions.
Well, Mrs. Reed, I want to thank you so much for this information. I think it's fantastic. I love the way you organized it based on broad assessments as well as the local assessments. I think it helps clarify for us, since we see so many assessments and kind of different terminology come our way. So I really appreciate the time to help explain. And I love this slide. I think this is the slide where, you know, it really comes to fruition for me, because it shows that we're using data and we're not just collecting data for the sake of collecting data, but we're using data to inform instruction. So, and meet the students where they're at. So I love that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's never a hard comment to take. Just really quickly, I had a comment back. I had a question back. And it's just a cultural shift that I wonder if we're seeing. So in kindergarten, it says that we have conference periods and the student and the parent come together and sit with the teacher. What percentage of parents are we seeing take advantage of this?
I would say close to 100%.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
I wanted to thank you because my experience has been is that we usually we would get our state testing scores and then we would come together, assess data and find the holes. But the problem was you get that information after the year is ended, so the students who had those holes are gone. And so by doing this periodically through the year in various ways, you're giving the teacher an opportunity to address needs right where they're at. And so that's really important, and it will save a lot of time and make time more valuable. So thank you very much.
Excellent job.
One correction, I misspoke. Elementary teachers have 2.5 hours, which is 150 minutes, not 250 minutes. But then the other thing I just wanted to share is the other really intentionality behind this is where Ed Services has really led in response to teacher feedback is that as we are, when we took a look at our school calendars for this year, we really thought of it from an instructional lens and took a look at where is open house, where is back to school night, and trying to make sure that we don't have these assessment windows right before that, because sometimes teachers get really tempted to want to create these beautiful projects for open house, but we lose sight of the meaningful pieces behind the assessment and the feedback that it gives us. And then the other thing that we've done is we've really asked all of our sites to make these assessment windows uninterrupted. So we won't be having dress-up days. We should be having major flag assemblies and things of that sort. And so that's all been really intentional by Ed Services to really make sure that these days that we're going to get quality information to help guide our instruction for the other 170 plus days of the school year. So kudos to Ed Services for really thinking about all these layers to make that really possible.
Well, I think it's really our teachers. So I just want to put that out there. They work so hard, and we're so lucky in my department that they reach out very vulnerably and authentically and share some of the challenges that they're experiencing, and allows us to be better at providing a structure and support for them to do this work, because I think the longer you're away from a school site, and so for me, obviously that's been quite a bit of time now, sometimes you can become disconnected to how it feels to apply something, because you can become very passionate about the bigger picture of the work. And so I just want to thank them for always being willing to share how hard it is to be a teacher sometimes, because it is, we want to make sure we're providing them with the tools to use this information.
I think too, the time allotted, middle school and high school does get that one period a day, but they have over 200 students. So having taught fifth grade, what I found was that it doesn't take a really long time to start to see who your strong students are and who the ones are that struggle. What I really appreciate is the online assessments that take the data and really pinpoint information, because that's what takes a lot of time. And especially if you have, at a secondary level, if you have 200 students, that's a challenge.
Perfect, thank you.
So we have no public speakers, so we are going to close session now, and we will return at 6 o'clock for the regular board meeting. Thank you.